We have dperry, international affairs analyst and former Europe and Middle East editor for the Associated Press, to really try to help us unpack these broader implications of the exchange that we're seeing right now. So Israel has recovered more remains, at least that's what we think so far, in really what appear to be heavily staged handovers at this point. What is your read on Hamas's strategy here, the kind of trickling of the return of these hostage bodies?
I'd have to assess they're playing games in order to buy time and create confusion and chaos and set the precedent for anything but speedy implementation of the 20-point plan. Because at the end of that 20-point plan lies the particular point that Hamas is probably going to try to avoid altogether, which is their disarmament and effective removal from Gaza. Mm-hmm. The trouble is, of course, as always, when you're dealing with professional liars, you never know when they might be telling the truth. From the beginning, there was suspicion that Hamas might have misplaced some of the bodies. And the numbers I heard were like 2, 3, maybe 4. All of a sudden, they lost 2/3 of the bodies and started claiming that they may be buried under rubble in Gaza, where they're also claiming that 11,000 Gazan civilians are buried. And that sounds plausible because, of course, Gaza is a monumental ruin.
But if that's the case, then wouldn't it be an excuse for Israel to say, okay, you can't handle it, you can't find all these bodies and move over, disarm, we're going to continue that search on our own?
I suppose it could. There is, to my mind, a dispiriting and unnecessary cynicism in Israel about the ability to ever get Hamas to actually disarm. So somewhat to my surprise, they're not even really forcing that issue. Because, of course, it's been now quite a few weeks since the ceasefire was supposedly agreed to by Hamas. And yet, we have no public indication that Hamas agreed to it. Only the assertion of Donald Trump, who's also no stranger to exaggerations and premature declarations.
All right. Well, we're going to turn to our next story here. Stick with us, Dan. You're not going anywhere. Rare show of unity across nearly all Haredi sects. The issue stems from decades of exemption. Most ultra-Orthodox Jewish men have been allowed to skip Israeli military service in favor of full-time Torah study, but that policy is under intense scrutiny by Israel's Supreme Court and government. The protest has already triggered school closures and has shut down key highways in the capital, with police initially warning of total gridlock around the city. Organizers say that these protests are essentially about defending their way of life against what they call a government crackdown on draft dodgers. For the state, though, it has become really a test of law, religion, and equality, all colliding once again in Jerusalem's streets. And how can we expect this to ultimately play out? This is a very sensitive topic amongst the Israeli public, a lot of anger amongst the secular Israeli public as to why an entire sector of the Israeli community is able to avoid these drafts when so many people are putting so much on the line throughout these last 2 years of war.
More than anger, there's rage. This is one of the purest cases of a cultural clash in a country that currently exists on Earth. And one of the things that's driving the anger, besides just the circumstances of the war in Gaza that's caused non-Haredi Israelis to have to do 100, 200 days a year reserve duty, clearly because of a shortage of manpower in the army, is the birth rate. Simple as that. You can have an outrage happening with 1% of the population. Haredim are currently 1/6 of the population because they have 7 children per family, which from the Israeli secular perspective is partly subsidized at taxpayer expense, with child allowances and unbelievable amounts of direct and indirect payments to the Haredim that enable Haredi men to have one of the lowest participation levels in the workforce of any group in the modern world.
Right.
They're doubling as a proportion of the country every 20 years. So 1/6 today becomes a third and then a majority, unless something changes. Can you imagine majority of Israelis not teaching their boys math, English, and science in schools? Girls somewhat less disadvantaged, interestingly, because they don't care. Studying Torah well into middle age instead of working. When they do work, largely make work jobs at the public expense and this religious infrastructure that's been built in the country for them. Not serving in the military. Expecting in these yeshivot not to pay tuition as you would if you study computer science, but to receive stipends clearly it can't be. So I would say to the Haredim, if you want what is undoubtedly viewed by the seculars as madness to continue, you can't have the birth rate. These two things are not going to work together. It's going to lead to a very significant clash of what nature, in what direction, I cannot say. As for the military issue, there's three schools of thought. One, the Haredi leadership, which is we don't want to serve in the army.
Right.
And they're encouraging their boys to go out to the street and shout slogans a la, we will die and not serve. Now, don't worry, no one's going to die. It's the seculars who are risking their lives. But the point is maximalist. There's a second point of view, and that is the current government basically depends on the Haredim, because the right wing has never had a majority without the Haredi parties. To go slow, to do something symbolic, to start and say, look, it's a start, a few thousand, as opposed to the entire 80,000 per annum that are evading. And what looks like a maximalist, but in fact is kind of obviously the just attitude, is by the opposition that basically says everyone should have equivalent duties and rights.
After a fragile compromise deal over leadership appointments collapsed the moment that Yair Netanyahu, the prime minister's son, was nominated for a top post. His appointment, complete with a car, salary, and office, has infuriated liberal delegates who say that it's proof of cronyism inside institutions meant to represent all Jews and not just Israel's political right. Well, now the Congress has been extended 2 more weeks as both sides try to salvage a deal, and the scandal is exposing just how political the WZO's inner workings really are. And on that note, I want to turn back to Dan Perry to discuss this, because I know this is probably something you have a lot to say about as well. You know, this fallout inside Israel's Zionist institution seems to blur the lines really between politics and communal leadership here. What does it tell us about how deeply Israeli partisanship runs through global Jewish organizations?
Oh, they're all very highly politicized. And in the past, these jobs have gone by, according to a party key, depending on various things that ultimately go back to elections in these bodies and in general. This, however, is representative of something in the world at this point, which is that there is no shame. You remember 10, 15 years ago when there was a bit of shame? At this point, it's done. Now, nepotism in Israel is not without precedent. When Sharon was prime minister, his son was in the Knesset. But his son was not seen in any way as divisive as Yair Netanyahu, who the idea that he should be making Israel's case somehow, being a spokesman for the Jewish people, is absurd, considering that he's detested in Israel for being a man in his early 30s who is himself evading the army, for an endless stream of defamatory tweets and outrageous behavior and libel lawsuits, I believe, that he's involved with. He's a very divisive figure. His father is on trial for corruption, and I don't see this ending very well.
All right. Well, just another crazy political happening in this beautiful country. We are going out for a quick break. Unfortunately, we're going to have to say goodbye to you, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us as per usual.